Well, thank you. Thank you for coming to an event that I simply do not deserve. But here I am, and I'll do my best to go over a few things that, in the words of Psalm 131, are too wonderful for me and have taken a perpetual hold on my mind and heart, even when my engagement with them falls short. I'm mindful of the urgent wisdom of that brief psalm, especially where it reminds us to back off and to take rest when things become too much, too wonderful. But I suggest that taking rest does not mean walking away. We rest to take strength, to grow a bit, and then we rejoin the quest, in Isaiah's words, sometimes soaring on eagle's wings, other times running, most often walking, even limping, unwearied rather, not fainting. And I tell you this straight off, I limp, and you'll know why in a minute. I know that I'm speaking to an audience in which varying belief systems and cultural values, artistic preferences, life stations, and the like may be represented. I also know that you know something about Wheaton College, that in one respect it is intelligently and articulately diverse, and in another committed unequivocally to a Christ-centered worldview, from and within which its diversity derives strength and articulates its various messages. So please understand that while I speak with conviction, I will neither be unmindful nor disdainful of what you might variously believe and how you might articulate your centralities if you were in my place. So what am I up to this evening? Well, I want to tell two stories. The my life part first, and the our living last. And the first, I promise you, will in no way comprise a solemn reading of I knew whom, studied with, composed for, performed at, drew applause from narrative, because there isn't that much. I just want to weave in and out of a few things of earlier years in order to get to the Harps and Riddles parts, those strong, puzzling, paradoxical, truth-informed matters of which pressing on is the essence. And if you take anything away from this evening, forget the Harold Best part, except to understand that God truly and graciously has worked on this flawed, oddly limited, and spottily trained life, that he keeps keeping my head and heart turned toward the cross-emptied tomb to which the Son of God addressed himself from the eternities, and from which he, the very Word of God, was raised, who reigns above and beyond and with us, everlasting, immutably truthful, and a treasure trove of wisdom and knowledge. Too high and wonderful? You bet. Do we back off? We press on. And as for tonight's subject, I like the words "my life in the arts" instead of "my life as an artist." For if I were to go over my life as an artist, I'd be speaking from noticeable shortfall. Whereas life in the arts situates me in a richness far beyond what I am as an artist. There's a profound difference between being an artist and being in the arts, especially when we understand the arts to be just one of the many living spaces in this spacious mansion called life. But there may be something even more important, and it's this. We're called to participate in life's wild charisma by living artfully, by exuding goodwill and loving kindness, by participating in and bringing holy nuance and tasteful discretion to our families, our neighbors, our work, our leisure, and above all, our worship. Living artfully is a permanent call spun out of the kind of wisdom that puts its curious touch to everything, feeds us with graciousness, with excellence beyond beauty, transforming, sweetening, and urging us on within the artless trio of faith, hope, and love. Thus, the arts and artists dare not afford to separate themselves from this grand generality. For being an artist in no way guarantees living artfully, any more than being a truth-driven preacher guarantees a life of personal truthfulness. So I'm an average artist, if that, and I mean that. If my work were subjected to the counsels of high opinion, the kind we find in history books, in course outlines, the great artistic venues, the New York Times reviews, it would not be noticed. Yes, I was good enough to earn good grades and show varied proficiencies in a curious educational mix, but I also learned that an A in one place might be a C in another, for the world is a gigantic zoo of grading curves. And yes, we can find something in them that will furnish us with self-credentialed splendor and load us a suitcase full of superlatives and associative rhetoric that will more than imply a partnership with the artistry of those who leave us in the dust. And we all do this to one extent or another. I certainly have, but it wears ever so thin in the ethical long run when the final books are tallied. I hold a doctorate in sacred music with concentrates in organ and composition from a very good institution. But this was preceded by 3.5 years of undergraduate study on Hammond electric organs, which included playing my junior and senior recitals on those ersatz contraptions. And little did anyone realize that one day the Hammond, particularly the Hammond B3, and I'd love to own one, would find a permanent place in the best of jazz and pop, blues, funk, and gospel. But playing Bach and Franck and Brahms and Vierne on them was a story gone wrong. It wasn't until my graduate work that I studied on some fine instruments. But even then, I did most of my practicing on a 3-rank pipe organ in my studio, or at home on my piano making believe with my feet. The compositional side of my work started out with straight A's and tumbled into something further down the alphabet when I showed one of my undergraduate orchestral compositions to my new graduate composition teacher, who, in front of the other students, dispatched it, better yet, dismissed it, as something better suited to the lower reaches of pedantry. And as a college sophomore, before I knew a rip about conducting, let alone conducting from the organ, the chairman of the music department informed me that I now had a job as organist choir director at the First Reformed Church, Newark, New Jersey, as if this were predestined before God gave me fingers or feet. This meant a 7 a.m. walk Sunday morning from my dorm to a bus from downtown Nyack, New York, to New York City's Upper West Side, then a subway ride to another terminal in Midtown Manhattan, a ride from there to Newark, consummated by a fearful walk to that frowning pile of Calvinist masonry on Broad Street. And there I conducted and played a morning and evening service and spent barren, why am I here afternoons in the apartment of someone probably 3 times my age, whose culinary imagination began and ended with tuna salad and was good at making bad coffee. Sunday after Sunday, $15 a week, and I cover my transportation. Oh yes, midweek choir rehearsals were included in that same tour package. And note this irony. While taking lessons and doing my practice hours on a lowly Hammond, I had a big old ivory-keyed 3-manual pipe organ straight out of the 19th century to play on Sunday, and I did not know a lick about which stops to pull. I was nervous, I was alone, I was ill-equipped, so much that more than once, I literally hoped for a bus wreck or a subway crash to bring peace to my soul. This is true. I soon came to understand that those nerves were just not 19-year-old nerves, but part of a dark, tenured something in resonance in the pit of my stomach. It wrapped nearly all my efforts at public performance in autumn browns and funereal grays, and continues to do so today, whithersoever I goest. I'm not talking ordinary nervousness, but a sense of second-ratedness, of locked-in imperfection, laced with a shot of peer fear that took the joy and the force of the music I knew and loved so well, wrung it out and hung it to dry in a land of thistles, owls, and critics. And what I knew ever so well and loved ever so much in my musical head and heart, and it was a lot, was confined to its private chamber, never quite getting down through my feet and fingers. My technique was so-so. I've always been physically awkward, and for the life of me, could never get my rear end loose enough on the organ bench to bring my feet anywhere near the pedal dances that fellow organists pull off with such aplomb. I truly had to wrestle into being everything I played. Yet, I studied with some truly fine people in my doctoral work and was classmate to a cadre of truly excelling musician organists. And during that same doctoral work, I became organist and choir master at Calvary Baptist Church, 123 West 57th Street, New York, yes sirree, right across from the Russian Tea Room in Carnegie Hall, and just a few doors away from Steinway Hall. And I continued to name drop Van Cliburn, fresh from winning the Tchaikovsky competition and America's new Cold War artist hero, was in regular attendance at this church and scared the macaroni out of me every time I spotted him in the organ's rearview mirror. I would have rather seen a police car in the organ's rearview mirror coming in Sunday after Sunday during the prelude. And James Buswell, an upcoming violin prodigy, sat in the balcony, immediately behind and to the left of the organ loft, and the macaroni continued. I was no match. I was no match for any of this. But there's more. I'm a left-handed conductor, and according to the French, gauche, and in the Latin, sinistra. Anyway, I passed my doctoral conducting exams in this perverse condition. And yes, I composed an oratorio-length piece for chorus, orchestra, and soloists. I copied out 187 pages of full score by hand on ozolid paper in India ink, and have the distinct honor of never hearing it performed. And yes, for those who are interested in archival matters, I still have the original manuscript, a combined wonder of skilled calligraphy and total silence. Meanwhile, I suffered an emotional collapse, and I was let go from my 57th Street church job with not much more than a party and a prayer. I was married with a young son, Gregory, and a soon-to-appear daughter, Susan, slowly becoming whole in her mother's body. And this emotional collapse was not Van Cliburn's fault, or the doctoral programs, or anything like that. But listen, it was rather part of the Lord's gracious way of using a traumatic circumstance and what we now call PTSD. And in his tough wisdom, he coupled this circumstance to a heart cry, one-sentence prayer 2 weeks earlier in a '58 Chevy. I was going south on the West Side Highway, New York City. A prayer that he bring me to him whatever it cost. For even though I was a professing Christian, a preacher's kid, Christian college professor, church musician, and all that, I was a numbly orthodox, lip-syncing halfway job for the Lord of the universe. It was painfully simple and biblically clear. God broke me his way in order to reshape me, howbeit slowly, leading me to the gradual discovery that the artistic work I might best do was to be found working within the arts, tracing their outlines from the inside, learning to think and speak and write as creatively as I could about them, submitting the whole to biblical and theological scrutiny. I was being led into another way of dwelling with the arts on behalf of them, on behalf of artists and the laity, the church, culture, and most centrally, all students. I wanted to lead, if at all possible, with my mind. And now get your calculators out as I face the square root of my 7,056th birthday come October 1st. I continue to experience surprise, to suffer correction, and to be increasingly cleansed and humbled. As I've already said, I have learned that limping is another way of walking. I came to this remarkable place called Wheaton in 1970, age 39, emotionally scarred. I was fearful, and yes, I was brain smart, but I was process dumb. I was clutching at fractional wisdom and fearful of confrontation, not always liking the lovable. I was administratively green, and I was chilblained by that masculine, evangelically anointed American challenge of showing leadership. But thanks to the forbearance of many and to this college's refreshing work in uniting mind and heart in a quest for a Christ-centered worldview, I joined in and began to discover that if my worldview were to have any worth, if my slowly developing Christ-centeredness were to have artistic usefulness beyond my limited artistry, and if I were to serve this honored place of learning with some degree of competence, it would come about through the developing of a progressively maturing heart and intellect in service to the arts, through the same Christ who dwells beyond the arts, a Christ as I see him now, in whom there are no Bach cantatas or Nigerian harvest songs, no sonatas or ragas, no motets or hip-hop, a risen Christ, Lord of every quarter note, Lord of every brushstroke and dance step and dithyramb, whose wisdom is not American or African or Western or Eastern, Jeffersonian or capitalist, but cosmic, uncompartmentalized, without limits, exceptions, or gaps. So here I was. Here I worked, and from here I retired, and here I am again, swaddled always in the goodness and greatness of others, better for dwelling in the arts, at peace in surrendering my own limitations, surrounded by excelling colleagues, and boy, did I love to hire people better than I was, and that wasn't hard. Visiting artists, scholars, thinkers, and doers from whose work I regularly derive and continually derive both nourishment and vicarious pleasure. And through God's oddly generous grace, Wheaton's Conservatory continues its unique migration, Abraham-like, and I was going to say wilder than ever, but I will say wild than ever now that you know who he is, Michael-like, into increasingly wider territory thanks to the leadership of him, the time-adorned worth of my older colleagues, the clarifying stewardship of the younger, the times ahead potential of undergraduates, and all the little folks full of whatchamacallit and vinegar who add their bright-eyed bounce to the best community school of the arts in this country, and I kid you not. But I have to tell you something. Yes, I was growing more articulate with the riddles of my craft. My writing and speaking skills were maturing. I was being called upon more and more to exercise them regionally, even nationally, and my thinking seemed theologically airtight. After all, artistic grandeur at work bringing glory to God was worth talking about, wasn't it? And who wouldn't want to build a biblical case for it? Who wouldn't want to use Western civilization's monumental achievements, its art, its music, its literature, as grounding evidence for a Christian aesthetic? After all, haven't Christianity and the arts climbed hand in hand up the stairs of magnificence? Who wouldn't want to proof text Scripture's call for a new and better song with Palestrina and Brahms and Mozart and Bach, Stravinsky, Handel, Britten, Ravel, and the like? So I took this grand riddle of high standards for the glory of God with Western civilization's highest as its chief cornerstone for granted, while citing mediocrity as the sand that the wobbly houses of mediocrity were built on. The glory of God was at stake, and cherishing both truth and beauty, why not take that final step and link them together, Christianize Platonic thought, and complete the paradigm? It all sounded so right, so unassailable. And I sloganized, beginning with the preachy "God deserves the best," and following through with Elton Trueblood's statement, "Holy shoddy is still shoddy." Aiming at these evangelical low standards, I said that it should not matter whether great art is accessible or inaccessible. It's the only kind worth pursuing, and by golly, by its very nature, meant to stretch people, take them deep, and put them on the aesthetic high art high road. And Christians have no option but to stretch themselves, to hunger for higher standards, because after all, stretching and hungering are the essence of Christian growth. In all of this, I forgot how long it took me to develop the standards that I believed in and was pushing. I assumed that every upward step that I took should be matched forthwith by everyone else, even if they could not tell a B flat from a milking stool. They should naturally want to gather around the feet of those who could. I brought the Reformation battle cry of sole fide, faith alone, over to my side. I cited Abraham's sojourn, his faithful going out, not knowing where he was going, and put in the right for trustfully doing so. I really thought I was on to something in applying this to artistic action. I thought I was doing the kingdom an aesthetic favor because, after all, God deserves the best of the best, the newest of the new, and most inaccessible of the inaccessible, with everybody grateful to be on board. And with faith at the center, making the strange familiar and the familiar strange, there should be no excuse for anyone to dodge the tough stuff or coddle the smarmy stuff, because faith is the only thing the just live by. And of course, this implied that if no stretching took place, faith was absent. And in a downward twist of intellect, I began to equate limited taste and low standards with shoddy faith. Dang, I naively forgot that if this idea were carried out to its ultimate conclusion, only the artistically pure could be the most spiritually secure. This elitist narrowness was not just limited to me in music. I remember talking to a member of the English department here and asked if it offered a course in the literature of Christian hymnody, and the quick answer was, "We don't consider hymnody to be a part of English literature." Well, for Pete's sake, whose property is it? How can Christian property not be considered part of a literary study in a Christian college? Were the humanities also exclusivist? To me, they were, at least to an extent. I don't know about now, but I remember when. Back to music. In the early 60s, unknowingly anticipating the makings of what Mark Knoll later called the scandal of the evangelical mind, a group of us musician educators decided it was time to invade and evangelize Christianity's lowbrow territory. The world of gospel songs, jazzy choruses, hot diggity dog evangelistic piano playing, crummy choral and orchestral music, mawkish organ literature, crooning altar calls, and pseudo-classical cantatas. Lee Olson from Nyack, Don Hustad from Moody, later from Southern Seminary, Charles Finney from Wheaton College, Al Lundy from Philadelphia College of the Bible, Ray Robinson from Peabody Conservatory, later president of Westminster Choir College, comprised the core. We were the first generation of evangelical practitioners to pursue doctorates. We were among the first artist citizens of evangelicalism's Faith and Learning Club. Our institutions were seeking accreditation with the National Association of Schools of Music. We formed an organization called the National Church Music Fellowship, with its naively Platonized slogan, "Spiritual music for a spiritual church. This organization had its own periodical, its own student chapters, annual conferences. We criticized, we lauded, we philosophized, we theologized, and we were helped out from the philosophical peripheries by those, again, right here at this dear place called Wheaton, whose call was to think deeply about the arts, but gave little or no time to thinking in the arts. Hence, more than a few issues were debated in the abstract. I remember asking a member of the philosophy department if it was possible to construct an aesthetic without engaging in the arts. And the answer was a quick and terse, of course it is. Again, right here at Wheaton, in the early days of the Artist Series, an invitation to the Robert Shaw Chorale to perform Bach's B minor Mass right here in this auditorium, was initially revoked by the administration, then debated and reluctantly granted. Why? It was in Latin, and it was Catholic. Right here at Wheaton, jazz was disallowed because it was worldly, as if Mozart and Wagner weren't. Rock music, ironically, was permitted because Christians were doing it to witness with, and later to turn worship into its own musical event. The overall scene at that time was at once beautiful, elegant, articulate, confusing, contradictory, dualistically, and in many cases unbiblical. I say again, much of what we were saying was good and it was right. And to this day, I remain passionately committed to a large part of it. But it was put together backwards. We were trying to aestheticize theology instead of anything near the opposite. I was wrong. I was sincerely wrong, often stridently wrong. And the thought of it now embarrasses me. But I slowly began to see into the errors as well as into my own quiet hypocrisies, because on the private, non-public side, I love jazz and blues, country, the Beatles, black and white gospel, Cajun, and then some. And on top of it all, ethnomusicology, the study of the music of the peoples of the world with its upsetting and God-ordained musical relativism, came my way. The windows were opening. Somewhere in the 1980s, things began to change with me. Truth continued to hammer away in its blinding fullness, and with its everlasting arms beneath my mind, a recreative wholeness began to emerge out of a sum of newly arranged parts. I began to see the importance of goodness over greatness, integrity and creativity over sacramentalized beauty. And in writing my first book, Music Through the Eyes of Faith, I began to show an understanding that continues to brighten my soul, push my mind, and I hope glorify the Lord. Later, in another book called Unceasing Worship, I took things further and said them, I think and I hope and pray more and more biblically. I have come to think in a profoundly different way into and with the arts, a way that celebrates and encourages the best of the best, while making abundant room for those imaginers and crafters in every place, every culture, for whom this particular way of thought is unheard of, or innocently assumed, or quietly homegrown, nurtured by its own natively sound advice. I began to find out that artistic values should work exactly the way the creation works. That is, in an anointed relativity, with no central aesthetic arbiter, and no authority to separate artistry from non-artistry. I wanted, in short, to encourage creative neighborliness and interior stewardship in a wide world that our narrowed and quasi-prejudicial attempts at multiculturalism have yet to fully touch on. And were it not for page 15, were it not for an increasingly creaky body, I'd love to get back into full-time harness and go at it with the likes of y'all. Now, what I want to do next, and you've been very patient and very polite, I want to spin a second story, a propositionally laced, time-warped creation parable in which the riddles that keep me refreshed and baffled are stated, I pray, in a better way, maybe a little puzzling way, because after all, we're talking riddles. Here's the story. In the beginning, sometime during no beginning at all, when everything that had never been seen could be seen all at once, God, all three of him, got together to talk a few things over. Let me try that again. God doesn't get together with himself now and then to talk things over. What I mean to say is that God, who is himself, the eternal Word, in which his infinity is always summed up, never stops talking, and when he changes the subject, he remains the complete Word and states this completion in an infinitely loving and various and replenishing ways, with his Spirit searching them out. At any rate, this time around, the three of them agreed that it would be time to get in the business of thinking up and making things that couldn't be found anywhere. Because there was no anywhere. There was no there, or anything. And there didn't have to be, because all three were all in all and didn't need any anywhere or anything to verify this and complete their joy. But they decided that all these things from no thing would be framed within a curious contraption that, once started up, could continue for as long as the three of them wanted it to. And they already had names for these two interlacings: Chronos, a kind of pacemaker for this other stuff called creation. And it didn't need to occur to them that they could do this instantly or piece by piece or both. That is, if 6 24-hour days would be needed, somebody might ask why it would take that long, especially for someone for whom slow and fast are the same. Anyway, their plan went something like this. First, yet all at once, they decided that who they are and what they make could never be the same. That ruled out a thing called pantheism and other kinds of slippery slope God is a pine tree slop. Second, but without a second thought, they agreed that everything they thought up and made would naturally be less than they are, incapable of running things by themselves and powerless to act outside of themselves. That ruled out the possibility of idolatry and other kinds of pass-the-blame cop-outs. To finish that part of the deal, they would create protocols by which all this stuff could interact, move around, balance each other out, combine, recombine, cooperate to such a degree that a few million light years here or there would tick off in split-second precision. Third, they decided to create an unheard of condition that would permanently seal the distinction between them and it. While they were never self-congratulating enough to seek endorsements, they knew themselves to be absolute, changeless, blindingly and inherently loving and unequivocally truthful, even willing to share themselves fully with anybody who might ask. They were simply a word-to-word, beyond words, free to do what they want to Holy Trinity. They had a shorter name for this: we are that we are that we are. An even shorter one: Spirit and truth, or just this: absolute. So they agreed to add an unheard of item to this creation thing. Let's call it relativity, but not that narrow thing a certain physicist would package up some centuries down the line. This kind of relativity would be cosmically different. They would remove truth and holiness and everything else about who they are from this part of the equation and allow everything they made to be dynamically neutral, relative to itself. No absolutes, no centralities, no way for anything to act or be like truth or right or wrong, just there, piece by piece, very good and very useful. The Spirit broke in and said, well, wait a sec. We like to talk, so let's allow all this stuff to talk too, but in a different way. It will talk to itself, but only in self-enclosed languages. We'll call these idiolects. An angelic yearling said, what's a idiolect? Right, said the Spirit who all along was breathing through the other two. Right, idiolects are ways of speaking known only to those few who speak that same way. And all other idiolects, no matter how many there are in the same boat. The cosmos will be abuzz with counterpoint. So all three and one of them agreed to give these multiplied and multiplying things multiple ways of speaking without ever speaking for the word or quoting the word directly. And here's something else about this relativity, the idea, they continued. There would be no such thing anywhere in all this stuff as the most beautiful of all, or king of the hill. True, one redwood might turn out to be more attractive than another, but that's just between redwoods. No redwood could insist on being more attractive than a Hereford cow or a bird of paradise. A tom turkey in Pennsylvania looking around for a date could make a value judgment, but only among turkeys. That way, Tina Turkey, the lucky one, even if she wanted to, could never turn around and insist that because yonder Tom thinks she's a knockout, she can sashay up to the Matterhorn or a barn owl and shame them into second and third place. Quality and worth within kind, that's the rule and that's it. The three and one fine-tuned this idea even further by acknowledging that a soon-to-appear word called beauty would probably work its users into a lathered-up dither because somebody's going to get the bright idea that one thing can be voted in at the expense of another. Well, why worry about that? Asked this yearling angel, now a sophomore. Because, God said, beauty is our word. It's about who we are, spirit and truth, and we are not art objects or galaxies or essences. We realize that somewhere down the pike, certain well-meaning folks, and Greek in particular, are going to take this word, they're going to essentialize it and aestheticize it, and sooner or later, others will make it the property of something they call art. While at the same time, a golfer in Pebble Beach is going to use that same word to describe both his wife and his Bugatti. Then turn around and trash a Bentley and the gal in polka dots driving it. And then we've got a real problem. Because who we are and what we make are going to be thrown together in a ubiquitous mishmash that insults us by glorifying everything not us. And that further means that if X is considered to be more beautiful than Y, and in the meantime, we're called the most beautiful of all, then we're going to end up in a combination of a cosmic Miss Universe contest and a coin toss. If we happen to win, our trophy will be a factory-made crown or something like a golden calf that we can wear in any situation from a church service to a seventh-inning wobble-wobble of God Bless America. But, said the sophomore angel, now enrolled in upper division studies. But, and an archangel broke in and said, what are you, a motorboat? And before he ever wept, Jesus smiled. Upper division kept at it. But all this cosmic splendor, it's like so awesome, like we can't see far enough, to get around it all. Doesn't its size say something about your awesomeness? Another upper division angel, a senior, a little bit more polished, said, well, all those future truth, beauty, majesty poets, aren't they going to couple grandeur and the three of you together? Look ahead. Somebody's probably going to write something like this. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. Or somebody else with a little less training might try it this way. Could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made? Were every stalk on earth a quill, and every scribe by trade, by man a trade. To write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. And then some Scandinavian might pick up on it and say something about seeing the stars and hearing rolling thunder, and end up talking about your greatness. All three smiled. They didn't frown. And God said, well, look, go find a rock slide, go find a gravel pit, bend over, look close, and you'll see 1,000,000 Matterhorns. All you need is one of our magnifying glasses, and you're bound to find something that out-Matterhorns the Matterhorn. Think it over. We're not making things big in order to prove ourselves. Maybe we're doing this 12 billion light year stuff so the folks whom we're going to think up and make, we're going to talk about them in a minute, if those folks ever lose the ability to walk by faith and start looking at things and measuring us by them, they're going to need size, big size, great reaches of size, to talk about everything from forgiveness to love to grace. They'll get all goose pimply and might even make the mistake of saying that they're closer to us when they look through Hubble or climb the Matterhorn or swoon at the moon than when they eat kale or pick dandelions. Think of size the way they're going to think of it, and then, angels, in your next quiet time, turn to that psalm that says something about big and small, light and dark, near and far, about how they're all the same to us. Don't forget, it's not just pebbles and mountains or atoms and galaxies, it's us, all by ourselves. Whirlwinds and sunsets and earthquakes can do what they want. We usually whisper. The Spirit refilled the lungs of the other two, and the three continued. Furthermore, let's assume that every great civilization or so, a heavy creative cream, a crème de la crème, will rise to the top. And philosophers and anthropologists and historians and artists will call this high culture and use it as a universal measure for those who can't make crème. Then they'll try to export cows and make some crème for these poor people and say, this is it, here's how you do it, forgetting that there are other things beside cows and crème, other things more homespun, tasty, and satisfying. In fact, the crème de la crèmers back home will have already begun to argue whether ordinary milk or even 2% has any relation to crème. And skim milk? No way, blue's untrue. The postgraduate angel, having just returned from an internship in Silicon Valley, texted this. Well, okay then. We're so used to splendor, and we go like, crème de la crème is the only way, and Jesus, used to communicating at the same level, texted back. Well, just you wait. One of these days, I'm going to put on some homespun breeches. I'm going to learn how to speak all over again. I'm going to sing some homespun ditties, carve some timber with my dad, maybe draw a few things in the dirt, defy the Baptists and learn to dance, and even go vintage at a wedding. No crème at all. Just a buffet of loaves and fishes and good people doing the best they can with what they have. It will be good. And it got quiet, and then the 3 in 1 did a final glorious, unheard of thing. They decided to take that infinite word person, empty it a bit, and bend it earthward, and create a man and a woman, and listen to this, in their spirit and truth image, and give them first and yes, last names, Adam and Eve, anybody. The heavenly host were, how should I say it, maybe a little bit jealous. They wanted to look into these things. And God reminded everybody that those first names could just as easily be Ivanovich and Nicole, or Fernando and Chandra. They kept on. First names are important, but it's that last name, that foundation name, anybody, that counts most. That's what being made in our image means. Anybody is the only name for likeness to us, along with a complete equality and openness with each other, period. No anybody is any more anybody than anybody else. No anybody is more or less image of us than anybody else. And anybody now or later who belches up some cockamamie rhetoric to the contrary not only breaks our moral and ethical laws, but takes a point-blank shot right at the 3 of us. We will take it personally. Those Genesis words after our image have nothing to do with noses or feet or hair or teeth or how tamales taste. It's the gift of going about things the way we do, pure and simple. Creativity, then, is not just an art word, it's an image of God word. Let me tell you something, God continued. One of these days, a curmudgeon of a linguist down at MIT, the name of Chomsky, who might not seem to be that interested in us, is going to do a little theology without even knowing it. He's going to say that children are born into the world bringing the sentence with them. Now, how about that? Chomsky, this old curmudgeon, nailed the image of God thing in a remarkable way. Furthermore, anybodyness means that what one anybody can do, another anybody can do. Anybody thinks, anybody speaks, anybody imagines and crafts, draws and dances and acts, and carves and sings and cooks, and whistles and plays and loves and serves and rules. These anybodies are whole folks long before we allow Melinda anybody to sing or draw or dance better than Farid anybody. But hang on. We're also going to allow each and every anybody to become a unique somebody, an individual. And an individual is an anybody with a personal creative accent, musical, mathematical, mechanical, literary, and so on. Name the accent. And everybody will have at least one and maybe more. No two alike, everybody equal, and how's that? Someone said, well, how do they fit into this absolute relative thing? God said both ways. They're going to have a blast making all kinds of things that are simply free to be what they are. They will imagine and build the way we do. That is, what they make will not be them, just like with us. It will always be less than they are and subject to who they are, just like with us. And this goes for everything from a dog sled to a symphony to the Sistine Chapel to a supertanker and to some kind of declaration about independence. All of these things are surprisingly relative to each other and to Fernando and Chandra. But don't forget, Fernando and Chandra are in our image. So above all, they will be filled with holiness, with grace, love, rightness, truth, pure purpose, and authority. And being this way is the only way to know what relativity is. And then they will know how to keep it in its place, just like with us. It's truth alone that determines what's relative and what's not. And as long as they know truth and the truth about everything, they'll be free. And this simply means that if the Fernandos and the Chandras behave, they'll do relative things rightly and sovereignly. And even if some of the things they might make hint at truth or shout it straight out, it will still be up to them to be truthful with it because of who they are, not because of what they make. We realize that we're risking a lot, but we want it this way. We realize that somebody down the line might get real cheeky and say that even truth is relative. That's the hell of it. But Fernando and Chandra will know better from the get-go. There was an eavesdropper, someone who took his name too far and too much for granted, who because of this had long ago fallen like lightning from the company of heaven. He loved to snoop and spy and impersonate, to sneak up on. He tried to climb back, couldn't. So he decided to go elsewhere and see if he could turn everything upside down just like he is, and make it look right side up. Dear friends, this story circles back into the eternities. There's little time left to talk about Mr. and Mrs. Anybody who listened to this eavesdropper, who took his advice and joined the upside-down world in which somebodyness became God. The relative became the absolute. The absolute was relativized, and everything that God had put them in charge of took charge of them. And everything they shaped, everything, could just as easily turn around and shape them. And it did. But we can conclude this way. This Jesus, to whom we've been referring, this Jesus did what he said he was going to do. And doing it once for all, he called the upside-down world back. He took it in his arms. He washes it clean and turns it right side up. He did this and continues to do this with our worship. our thinking up and our making, our work and our rest. In and through him, we are gradually being allowed to get back into an even better version of the original story. We can learn it well, pass it around, and rejoice in it. And as for the riddles, well, I hope you've not only been able to draw some lessons about the arts, especially its restlessly and gloriously individuated anybodiness and everywhereness. I hope we can understand that the sheer fact of the creative sentence, taking shape in a tune or a dance, a picture or a story, will always sneak up on all of us. And whatever our standards might be, I hope we will always be in love with the fact that that strange creative impulse was granted to us in the very first place. I hope that the merest hint of art, in the merest of circumstances, long before they explode into uncanny mastery, will be seen as delights in themselves and a veritable joy to someone. I hope that we can understand that when anyone takes an imaginative stab at anything in any walk of life, they risk something deep about themselves. I hope we understand that the truly wise among us will always want to do it better and will educate accordingly, from Ethiopia to Uruguay, from Baltimore to Timbuktu, from a night-haunting didgeridoo to a Stradivarius, from an Ashkenazi and a Vermeer to a gypsy fiddler and a tramp artist, from, yes, a praise band to a rapper to a Baroque choir to bluegrass to Irish fiddling to a boy soprano to a string-strung tin can violin in Ghana, from long lawn to gamelan, from near to far to home again, from cathedral to storefront to a worship-worn Bible in a Kansas farmstead to a teepee. I hope that we come to understand that wherever we go, if we're truly and freely inquisitive, good listeners, good watchers, fair-minded people, good stewards of worldwide stewardship, we will soon be able to pick up on something with a universal lilt to it that simply points and murmurs, Jesus Christ is Lord. And once we turn this simple truth into a barrage of offerings, and once we urge them face forward, glorifying God, then the smiles break out and the light will shine. Only in this way can we strive for the necessary excellence of which the Savior is the incarnate epitome. Grizzly old Isaiah put it this way: "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. But see, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you, and nations will come to the brightness of your shining." Amen. Thank you very much.